And coming up today on What Now, President Trump withdraws the United States from international organizations, which he says are contrary to U.S. interests. And also today on the program, we will also be discussing the foiling of a plot to allegedly kill the leader of Burkina Faso through a coup attempt. These will form our focus in just a moment. Stay with us. All right, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us on the program. You're watching World Now. I am Precious Amayu. All right, let's begin in the U.S., where the President, Donald Trump, has signed a memorandum directing the withdrawal of the United States from 66 international organizations that no longer allegedly serve American interests. The memorandum orders all executive departments and agencies to cease from participating in and funding 35 non-United Nations organizations and 31 UN entities that operate contrary to U.S. national interest, security, economic prosperity, or sovereignty. This decision follows a review which was ordered earlier this year of all international intergovernmental organizations, conventions, and treaties that the U.S. is party to, as well as those the United States funds or supports. President Trump's stance is to ensure he ends U.S. participation in international organizations that waste taxpayer dollars on ineffective or hostile agendas. Many of the international bodies promote radical, according to him, President Trump said they promote radical climate policies, also global governance and ideological programs that conflict with U.S. sovereignty and economic strength. Now, for the analysis of this development, a partner with Gainful Solutions and an international affairs analyst, Stephen Hayes, joins me from Washington, D.C. Good to have you join us, Mr. Hayes.
Thank you. It's good to see you again.
All right, so let's begin. This is not new. This is not the first time he's doing this. He did also withdraw the U.S. from a few treaties and international organizations in his first tenure. But talk to us about what you think is different this time.
Well, I think they're far more thorough this time. They're going over a strong list, and they're sending strong political signals. Frankly, some of the organizations that the U.S. is members of, we probably should withdraw because they have it, not because of ideological reasons, but for financial reasons, and whether in fact they're really very effective. But I think it sends a signal globally of further withdrawal and isolation from the rest of the world by the United States, and I think that's troubling. Particularly on environmental issues where a lot of the carbon emissions are coming from the United States, about 25%, I think it is. So all that has strong ramifications for global cooperation or the lack of global cooperation. And I think that's troubling.
Does President Trump has a point, though, in terms of how the U.S. engages with some of these organizations? Most of them, if not all of them, the U.S. is perhaps the highest funding member. And then they say, look, it doesn't serve their interest. President Trump said it doesn't serve the country's interest. I mean, does he make a point or make sense just at that particular point, maybe not for climate change and others?
Well, he does make a point, and as I said, I think some of the withdrawals should be made. But there are others that are, I think, critically important to global cooperation, and particularly in view of climate change, for instance, in view of growing nuclear concerns. I think those are the organizations that we need to stay very much engaged in. I think we don't really lose that much financially by, or save that much, I should say, financially by withdrawing from these agencies. But we do lose a lot in terms of intelligence gathering, and I say that with a small I, not in terms of spying, but in terms of being able to learn what's going on from others more directly. And I think that's going to hurt our own national interest as well. But yes, he makes a point. There's a lot of waste. Everyone knows that. There's a lot of, as we would say, dead wood that needs to be trimmed. And so I think in that regard, it's good. But I think a lot of the withdrawal is from ideological for ideological purposes.
And Trump's move reflects his long-standing wariness of multilateral institutions, particularly the United States. He has repeatedly questioned the effectiveness, the cost, and accountability of international bodies, and he has argued that they often fail, like I mentioned, to serve the U.S. interest. I mean, just also, at some point, has any of these organizations served the interest of the U.S. at all? Because again, he's also wary, not just of the UN organizations. He has his own. What's the word I'm looking for? He's not someone who believes in multilateralism. Is there any way that some of these organizations serve U.S. interests?
Well, of course, a lot of them do. But again, if you're looking at it from an ideological point, and particularly a conservative point of view, politically conservative point of view, they don't necessarily directly serve our interests. It is in our interest to be able to communicate and cooperate with others. But again, I think he's right also to some of the organizations have favored other ideologies, other interests that harm the United States. One of his pet peeves, which is understandable, is the UN Human Rights Commission, for instance, which has had some of the greatest offenders of human rights running it. It makes no sense. So some of this makes a lot of sense, and others I think is very short-sighted and damaging to U.S. interest.
All right, so Mr. Hayes, I'm going to put you on hold as I make this announcement. We are going to interrupt a lineup of programming as we cross over to Owerri, Imo State, to bring you the live coverage of a post-briefing by Ikenga Gochiri after his defection to the APP.
Governor, Imo State, Her Excellency, Lady Chinyere Ihoma Ekumaro, PhD, Deputy Governor, Imo State.
So, Mr. Hayes, President Trump had hinted at this last year that he was going to make this move. But this announcement came just a few days after international condemnation of the military intervention by the U.S. in Venezuela. Do you perhaps feel like he was ticked off by that condemnation and doesn't like the idea of being checked by international organizations?
Well, we know he doesn't like the idea of being judged or checked by international organizations. Most announcements are not by accident. That is, timing is important. And so this could have been linked to Venezuela. His administration has been particularly adept at drawing attention away from certain events by creating new events or new issues. So the timing of this is interesting, but at the same time, I think it's probably fairly transparent and that it was going to happen in any case. Is it linked to Venezuela? Possibly, but I think that's not a driving motive in this case.
And what does this mean now in terms of being able to voice concerns? No one has been particularly able to check him, but we've seen President Trump, go on this territorial expansionism ride. He's also becoming, quite frankly, an imperialist, something that he once spoke against when Iraq was invaded. So who now has the ability to check him, even though the withdrawal is not immediate?
It's not so much who has the ability, but who has the will. The ability is there. Congress could check him. Republicans could gather some individual courage, I suppose, depending on how you look at it. The checks are there. The will to use those checks, though, is lacking, and particularly in Congress. It hasn't been, particularly the Republicans, since they have the majority, haven't been willing to check. They've been willing to go along with this all along. Some of this is for ideological reasons, which I think troubles me a bit, but also some of it is that Trump has been very effective in threatening various members of Congress by promising to run people against them in the primaries. and to come out publicly against him. Now, that may be coming to a point of backfiring. We'll see. I think there's growing concern in this country about what's happening. There are a few more Republicans willing to challenge him, but not many, not enough to carry on key issues.
What does this mean for global cooperation on certain issues? Again, with the President Trump, neither him nor any member of his administration went for the G20 summit, and then a resolution was reached without him. Whether he would implement those resolutions or completely set a new one when the U.S. hosts this year remains to be seen. When things like this happen, there are areas where the world cooperates. There are certain issues like climate change, health matters. Now, when he pulls America out of these kind of international organizations, what does it then mean for global cooperation on these issues?
Well, I think U.S. participation is critical in most of those organizations. So I think it's going to make it much more difficult to have effective results from this. I think the withdrawal from the climate change convention is one good example of that. Although I think the Republicans would argue, and Trump would argue, that global climate change convention hasn't been effective. Nobody's followed the guidelines in any case. So I think that's going to be an interesting argument. But it does create a climate of less cooperation, and I think we are, as a civilization, as a species, it's vital now that we do cooperate globally, and I think it's going to be much more difficult.
Thank you so much for your time, as always. Partner Gainful Solutions, we're following developments there in the U.S. and what it means for the U.S. stand in the world order. Always a pleasure to have you on, Stephen Hayes.
Thank you, and it's always an honor. Thank you.